si tratta di crimini abominevoli che vanno cancellati dalla faccia della terra.
Abominable crimes that must be erased from the face of the earth. It was with those words that Pope Francis opened in February a summit of the Catholic Church dedicated to the fight against paedophilia. He made it a big priority and promised concrete and effective measures. Too little too late, though, according to victims. The practices were hidden for years, and the repeated scandals have shaken the Church. In 2002, the American Catholic Church faced an unprecedented crisis. It was the Boston Globe newspaper that was the origin of the revelations. It carried out detailed investigations over 2 years, hundreds of articles uncovering thousands of paedophilic acts committed by priests in the Boston region. Crimes covered up by the Catholic authorities. Priests simply moved from one parish to another when cases came to light. In the face of yet another scandal, the Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal Law, resigned in December 2002.
With all my heart, I wish to apologize once again for the harm done to victims of sexual abuse by priests.
It's a story you no doubt know. It was adapted into a film, Spotlight, winner of the Best Film Oscar in 2015. So after all that then, well, surely everything had changed. But 17 years after the revelations of the Boston Globe, the American clergy obviously still failing to root out the problem. In August 2018, an investigation in the nearby state of Pennsylvania implicated 300 priests for the rape or assault of hundreds of minors. So what has become, though, of the Boston victims? Have they achieved justice? Has the church there changed? Well, Fanny Allard with Philip Crowther revisits Boston for France 24.
This is the church of my youth. It's called St. Denis Parish in the town of Douglas. And this is where I was baptized. And I guess between my first communion and my confirmation, this is also the place that I was sexually assaulted by my parish priest.
I was about 3 or 4, and a priest from Thailand was introduced to my family, and he never left. And through the course of time, he decided to start abusing me, abuse 2 of my siblings.
In 1977, when I was a junior in high school, 16 years old, I was raped by one of my coaches, teachers, priest. He was all the same, James Talbot.
Boston is considered the most Catholic city in the United States. It is also the home of the most infamous child sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. It was revealed by Spotlight, the investigative unit of the Boston Globe newspaper.
We began investigating the Catholic Church in 2001, in August of 2001, and we published our first story in January of 2002. Then we proceeded to spend the next year writing 600 additional investigative stories about the cover-up of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, until finally Cardinal Bernard Law resigned.
Cardinal Law was the Archbishop of Boston in 2002. The documents revealed by the Globe showed that he was aware of the crimes committed by several priests in his diocese. Instead of denouncing them, the church covered them up and moved pedophile priests from one parish to another in order to suppress the crisis.
First we thought, wow, there might be 6. And wouldn't that be a terrible thing, but also wouldn't it be a very big story? Well, by the time we finished our reporting, we were able to publish that there were at least 70 priests in the Boston Archdiocese who had been accused of sexually abusing children and young people. And literally there are tens of thousands of victims and survivors of clergy sex abuse all over the world who previously were suffering in silence. I mean, they believed that what happened to them was very rare. Many of them believed that they were somehow responsible for what happened to them. But now they understand that this is a systemic problem within the Catholic Church. Now they understand that it's not them. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the Catholic Church.
Guilt was a feeling shared by all the victims. The investigation by the Boston Globe encouraged hundreds of people to tell their story. Jim Scanlon was a 42-year-old dad in 2002. Like so many others, he was convinced he was the only one to have been raped by a priest.
I just wanted it to go away. I just didn't tell anyone, didn't tell my parents, I was married at the time and didn't tell my wife. The Globe story broke in January of 2002, and on a Sunday morning after church, I'm reading this story, and I saw how systemic it was throughout the Boston Archdiocese, and how complicit the leadership was, over and over and over again, moving many priests. And it sounds ignorant, but you really think you're the only one, and that blew my mind. But the church did this over and over again to all of us.
Faced with the distress of the many victims, the Catholic Church remained and largely remains silent. The Archdiocese of Boston refused to talk to us, claiming a busy period of study for future priests. The 3 seminaries in Boston that belong to the Roman Catholic Church are actually under investigation and won't talk to journalists. Church doors in Boston remain shut. That was until we came across St. Anthony Shrine in downtown Boston.
Most priests are terrified to talk about this. They're absolutely terrified. The whole issue is obviously really uncomfortable, and it's uncomfortable to talk about, and it's uncomfortable to administer. There's absolutely a sense of being very embarrassed, right, by certain parts of the church, and feeling a sense of urgency that, hey, we need to do something about this. We need to fix this. We need to move. And for most priests, it's outside of our control. These decisions are made other places.
That won't do for victims of abuse by clergy. On this Sunday, as every Sunday since 2002, members of SNAP, the survivors' network of those abused by priests, gathered in front of the Cathedral of the Holy Cross, the largest Roman Catholic church in New England. Each of them suffered sexual abuse by a priest during childhood or adolescence. And among them is Jim Scanlon.
Those that aren't complicit directly know they're complicit indirectly, that they turned the other way or they were fearful for their own religious careers. The good ones actually would have quit. My faith is never gone. My belief in the Catholic Church as an institution is long gone.
Boston is one of the oldest cities in the United States. Most of its inhabitants are descendants of Irish and Italian immigrants who arrived in the 19th century. In those families, the Catholic faith was deeply ingrained, and the priests were considered God's ambassadors on earth.
My mother was and still is extremely religious, and I think that blinded her to a lot of what was happening. My vagina would just be red and inflamed and sore and bleeding. I don't understand how seeing that again and again and again in your child, you would not question it. And I feel like she has chosen religion over her children.
Alexa McPherson was raped again and again between the age of 3 and 9 in her own home. Today she raises her children on her own. She wants to warn them and speaks openly about her experience.
I feel weird when I ask questions about it because it's such like a hard topic to talk about. So I was just writing them down, and like even when I was writing them down, it was kind of awkward still.
As my 2 daughters have grown and hit ages where abuse happened to me, has caused me to remember abuses that I thought I had shut out, thought I had dealt with, and I hadn't.
The Catholic Church has repeatedly claimed that priests are protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. The Church is neither obliged to reveal crimes committed inside the institution, nor does it have to hand over any documents if it believes its constitutional rights are at risk.
You know, obviously the church was behind it. They said, "You never told us it was a press conference." I said, "I certainly did. What it even says in the reservation, table facing 12 chairs, and I told you why." And they were freaking out.
Lawyer Mitchell Garabedian has dedicated his career to defending thousands of sexual abuse victims. He already had the church in his sights in the 90s, long before the revelations by the Boston Globe. After 2002, some U.S. states changed their statute of limitation laws. They were often too short for victims to be able to pursue their aggressors.
Victims do not come forward, for the most part, until they're 40, 50 years old. They just can't handle it. They can't cope with it. Because the statute of limitations is being changed, many victims can file lawsuits where they can gain access to the secret files and documentation, where bishops and perpetrators and monsignors and priests who were perpetrators can be deposed, where answers under oath have to be given, where trials can take place. So the dam is breaking. Take away their robes, take away their religion. They're criminals. If it was you or I, we'd be in jail.
The statute of limitation period often kept victims from even trying to take their attackers to court. Jim Scanlon was able to sue his abuser in 2005, but only because he had left the state of Massachusetts for Maine. The state's laws no longer protected Father Talbot. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for rape.
3 years later, Talbot came up for his first parole hearing. One of the members of the parole board asked, "How many victims have you admitted to?" And he admitted to 89. And it was at that point that I was really satisfied that I did what I did and came forward. And I knew I wasn't the only one when we went to trial and so forth. When he said that number,
Phil Saviano is another of the small group of victims who did get to see their abusers convicted in court. Saviano was a whistleblower in the Boston case. He now spends his life testifying and helping other victims. For him, the church has not changed. Despite the Dallas Charter, adopted in 2002 by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, it mandates that all allegations of child sex abuse by clergy should be turned over to law enforcement. It's a text that Phil Saviano says is found wanting.
It had two major failures. One is that there were no provisions in there to hold the bishops accountable for any of their failures. No way to discipline or reprimand any of the bishops who had protected people like Father Hawley. And then the other thing, which was really incredible to me, was that it only addressed cases here in the United States. Well, what about the rest of the world?
17 years after Boston, the church is struggling to reform. More and more church abuse scandals are uncovered, and church pews are getting emptier.
This is the story that won't go away, partly because the Vatican has really done very little.
And strive to live out the words of your Son.
What does it take to stop child abuse?
So as to break the bonds of death and manifest the resurrection. So much of Christianity is courage. What are people going to think if I say this?
It's a lifetime of healing.
The caution here of hardening heart, I think, is about a lack of empathy. When we have a lack of empathy for people who have been hurt.
If they want to save the church, they're going to have to understand that it can no longer be a place of secrecy and privilege. They're going to have to become transparent the same way government and corporations are having to become transparent.
Annie Haller revisiting Boston there for France 24. Well, that's all from this week's edition. Don't forget, of course, you can catch it and the previous editions as well on our website at france24.com. Thanks very much for watching. More news in just a moment.